I took her up somewhere nice in Kenya and proposed.
It's very romantic. There's a true romantic in that.
There is.
The palace fell into silence before the day truly began. The morning sun over Windsor rose slowly through a thin veil of pale mist, its light brushing against the palace's ancient stone like a hesitant hand, unsure whether it was welcome. This was meant to be an ordinary day, one shaped by calm routines, familiar schedules, and the gentle rhythm of royal order. Yet the air already felt uneasy. Something was wrong, and no one needed words to know it. The stillness inside the palace carried weight, the kind of silence that holds its breath and refuses to exhale. Long corridors, once alive with the quiet hum of staff and the soft echo of polished shoes, now felt frozen, suspended in time. Footsteps softened instinctively. Whispers lingered too long, and even the ticking of the grandfather clock in the west corridor seemed reluctant to break the air. Royal aides moved with restrained urgency. They glanced toward closed doors, avoided questions they knew they could not answer for days, and kept their faces carefully neutral. Beyond the palace walls, speculation rolled outward like a restless tide. News agencies waited. Royal correspondents piled up. Loyal supporters across the world held on for any word about the Princess of Wales. The palace issued its statements with practiced precision, carefully phrased, brief, composed. Yet inside, the atmosphere told a very different story. Behind the polished language and formal reassurances, a quiet dread had taken hold that no official wording could hide. Catherine, beloved by millions, had been in hospital care for several weeks. The public was told she was recovering, resting, surrounded by family, but the truth within the palace walls was far more fragile. Doctors moved in and out of her private suite with solemn precision, their expressions guarded, their movements deliberate. The medical wing, normally hidden from view, became the heart of a kingdom's worry. Prince William had not left her side for long stretches of time. He spent hours pacing hospital corridors, phone clenched tightly in his hand, glancing at every message as if one might bring a miracle or a sudden change. Those closest to him noticed the shift immediately. He barely spoke unless necessary, his words measured and sparse. Sleep only came when exhaustion forced it, and even then it was shallow and restless. His life narrowed to one purpose alone: to be near her, to hope, to pray, and to wait. There was something quietly devastating in the way he carried himself. To the outside world, he remained composed, dutiful, stoic, and steady, every inch the pillar of the monarchy. But in private, the mask had begun to crack, and the weight of it all showed through. The strain was visible in his eyes. Eyes that once held calm assurance now carried fatigue and fear. The voice that had led ceremonies and speeches with confidence now faltered whenever he spoke her name aloud. The morning of that fateful day began like all the others, until it didn't. A nurse appeared at the far end of the hallway, her posture professional, her expression serene, yet her eyes betrayed the tremor beneath. She approached slowly, respectfully, and stopped before him. "She's asking for you, Your Royal Highness." It was a simple sentence, but in that instant, time lost its order. The world outside, the press, the ceremonies, and the expectations all ceased to exist. There was only the room beyond the door. William rose quietly, his breath shallow. He had walked through many doors in his life, into council chambers, war zones, and grand halls filled with history. None had ever felt as daunting as this one. As he stepped inside, the muted hum of medical machinery filled the air. Life reduced to steady digital pulses and measured rhythms. Catherine lay in her bed, her face pale, yet radiant in a way only she could be. Grace had always followed her like sunlight. Even in the darkest places, it never left her. She turned her head and smiled faintly when she saw him. That same smile that had once charmed the world, now holding no fear, only peace. William took her hand. It was cool, delicate, yet firm with a quiet strength that spoke louder than words. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Their silence said everything words could not. The man who had stood before nations now found himself powerless before the woman he loved. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper. "My love," she said. Promise me you will keep smiling for them. Each word seemed to carve itself into the air. He frowned slightly, not yet understanding. For who? He asked gently. For the people, she replied, her voice trembling but steady in spirit. They need to see hope in your eyes, even when I am gone. The word gone hung between them. Fragile, final, heavy. William's chest tightened. He had known this moment might come, but knowing and accepting were not the same. Don't speak like that, he whispered, pressing her hand to his lips. You're getting stronger. But Catherine only smiled again, a slow, knowing smile that reached her eyes. You've always been my strength, she said softly, and I have always been your peace. Her words broke him in ways no public tragedy ever could. Sensing the sanctity of the moment, the nurse slipped quietly out of the room. The morning light filtered through the hospital window, bathing Catherine in gold, the kind of light that belongs to memories. She looked at him with calm determination. I want you to tell the children stories, she murmured. Keep them laughing. Let them feel joy when they think of me. I don't want their hearts to remember sadness. William swallowed hard, his voice trembling. Catherine, please. She reached up, brushing his cheek gently. We both know some goodbyes begin long before they are spoken, she said. But this is not the end, she continued. When you see George smile, when Charlotte sings, when Louis laughs at your silly jokes, remember my love. I am there. He closed his eyes, tears finally tracing down his face. For years he had been taught that emotion must never break through the armor of duty. But in that moment, duty was irrelevant. All that mattered was love, the kind that transcends titles, crowns, and kingdoms. She paused, her breath shallow, her gaze still tender. Heaven has its own way of staying near, she whispered, and then came silence. Not the kind that feels empty, the kind that carries weight, the kind that lingers because it holds something eternal. William bowed his head, his body shaking quietly. The only sound in the room was the faint hum of machines and the muffled toll of the palace clock striking 12. Outside, the kingdom continued in motion, unaware that within these walls its future had shifted. He pressed his forehead to her hand, whispering promises meant only for her, apologies, memories woven through tears. When he finally stood, his shoulders were heavy, his heart fractured, but still beating, because even in death, she had left him purpose. As he walked back through the corridor, the nurse stood waiting. Their eyes met, and no words were needed. The silence returned, deeper this time, spreading through the palace like a shroud. Beyond the stone walls, the world still believed in recovery, in hope, in another official update. But within Windsor, everyone knew something sacred had ended. For the first time in a long while, the palace felt different. Its portraits, its chandeliers, its endless echoes of lineage felt heartbreak, like any ordinary home that had just lost someone irreplaceable. The room remained still, the kind of stillness that seems to hold its breath between two worlds. Medical staff stayed in the outer corridor, and even the beeping of the monitors felt gentler, as though the machines themselves understood they were intruding on something sacred. Prince William remained by Catherine's bedside, motionless except for the tightening of his fingers around hers. He wanted to say something, anything, but his throat felt locked. Every word seemed too small, too fragile to carry the weight of what lingered unspoken between them. She looked at him for a long moment, as if memorizing his face. The strength in her gaze was unmistakable. This was the woman who had stood beside him through public storms and private uncertainty, through endless ceremonies and quiet laughter at home, balancing crown and motherhood with grace. "Do you remember," she asked softly, "the first time we brought George to the balcony?" William nodded, managing a faint smile. "You told me not to wave too much," he said, "or he'd think it was a game." A light laugh escaped her lips, delicate and fading quickly. "You did wave too much," she whispered. "You always tried to make him laugh, even when the world was watching." Her hand trembled in his, and he steadied it gently. The smallness of the moment felt enormous beyond those walls. A shared memory of laughter, so private and fragile, carried the weight of a nation already bracing for news. Outside, people waited. Inside, two souls clung to pieces of an ordinary life that once felt eternal. "Promise me," Catherine said after a pause, her voice thinner now, that you'll never let them forget the sound of laughter in this house. The words landed gently, but they cut deep. William closed his eyes. I promise, he said, his voice breaking despite himself. She smiled faintly, quiet satisfaction softening her features, easing the sharp lines of pain. You've always been good at keeping promises, she added, except the one about taking fewer night calls. He almost laughed through the tears. You never let me forget that, did you? Her eyes drifted toward the ceiling as the morning light shifted to gold. I am not afraid, she said suddenly. I thought I would be, but I'm not. The words struck him like a blow. Catherine, she turned to him, her gaze calm, almost luminous. I've seen too much goodness to fear what comes next. I've seen it in you, in the children, in the people we've met. That's what I want you to hold on to. He shook his head, tears streaming freely now. Don't talk like this. We'll find another way. There's still hope. There is always hope, she said softly. But sometimes it looks different than we expect. Her eyes drifted toward the window. Sunlight played against the glass, and for a moment she seemed far away, as if already seeing beyond the walls, beyond the pain. You once told me, she murmured, that love makes us brave. You were right. He could barely breathe. You made me brave, he said. Silence followed, gentle, heavy, eternal. She looked at him again, her lips moving faintly. He leaned closer. Promise me something else, she whispered. Anything, he said instantly. When you smile in public, she said, don't let it be for duty. Let it be for life. Let it be because you still believe in what we began together. William pressed her hand against his chest. I don't know how to do any of this without you. Her fingers moved weakly, brushing against his. You already do, she said. You just haven't seen it yet. A faint shiver passed through her body. Her breathing slowed. Every second felt suspended, stretched thin between now and forever. He wanted to call for the doctors, to stop time, to beg for one more hour, but she met his eyes and gave a small shake of her head. Stay, she whispered. He stayed. She smiled again, that soft, radiant smile the world had fallen in love with. Tell the children, she said, pausing to gather strength, that I love them beyond words, that no distance can ever take that away. And when they're older, she continued, tell them I saw heaven in their laughter. William's heart broke quietly. He bent his head against her hand. I'll tell them, he whispered. The clock outside struck once, a quiet toll marking the moment between breath and eternity. Catherine's eyes began to close, her voice thinning to little more than air. When you see the children smile, she whispered, you will see me. And when the world feels too heavy, remember my love, that heaven has its own way of staying near. Her words lingered in the still air, fragile, eternal. William's tears fell freely now, unchecked. He had wept before, but never like this, never with the helplessness of a man who would give everything for one more heartbeat. He kissed her forehead, whispering words only she could hear. I love you, always. For a brief instant, her fingers tightened in his, a final echo of life, of connection. Then her hand grew still. The machines hummed softly. Morning light spilled fully across her face. William bowed his head and wept, quietly, reverently, human grief that did not seek witnesses. A nurse entered silently, her face composed, her eyes wet. She looked at William, then at the still figure of the princess, and gently drew the curtain. Outside, the palace clock struck again. The chime carried across the courtyard. Life continued, unchanged as it always had, but within those walls, the world had shifted forever. William remained seated, holding her hand long after the room had emptied. His tears dried, leaving behind the quiet ache of something sacred gone. He looked at her one last time, memorizing the serenity on her face, the faint trace of peace, as if she had only drifted into rest. When he finally rose, the nurse waited by the doorway, offering a folded cloth. He nodded but said nothing. Words no longer felt adequate. He walked into the corridor where the royal physician stood waiting. The man bowed respectfully, murmured something William barely heard, and turned away. Every step down that corridor felt heavier than the last. He passed portraits of ancestors, monarchs, soldiers, queens, all framed in gilded silence. For the first time, he felt the unbearable loneliness of legacy, the crown, the lineage, the destiny. None of it could mend what he had just lost. At the chapel corridor, he paused. He turned once more toward the room behind him, his voice barely audible, meant only for the walls. "Good night, my darling." And with that, the future king stepped into the longest night of his life. The aftermath unfolded within the walls. Corridors never meant to carry grief, only ceremony and history. That morning, they carried silence. Silence like fog drifting through old stone and polished wood. Servants moved softly, unsure whether to speak or bow, as if even acknowledgement might disturb the fragile air. Prince William sat alone in the chapel. The faint scent of candles mixed with cold marble and ancient prayers. His military jacket lay beside him, forgotten. The crown fell away. He was simply a man mourning his wife. Light filtered through stained glass, crimson and blue spilling across the pews like a painting of sorrow. He did not cry loudly. His grief was internal, the kind that settles into the bones and refuses to leave. No one approached him. Even courtiers who had served generations stood uncertain. Finally, Queen Camilla entered. Her steps were soft, her face pale but steady. She said nothing at first, only rested a gentle hand on his shoulder. "She was light," William murmured. Every room she entered felt alive. Camilla's eyes glistened as she nodded. "And she still is. Light doesn't die," Camilla said quietly. "It just changes form." William turned to her, his composure stripped bare. "How do you keep breathing?" he asked softly, "when the air no longer feels like it belongs to you?" Camilla paused. "You remember that the air is filled with them," she said. "Every breath carries the love that never left." Outside, preparations had already begun. The chief press secretary met with royal aides, shaping the announcement with care and restraint. They rehearsed the phrasing, dignified and calm. But elsewhere in the palace, hearts were breaking. King Charles waited. He had aged years in hours. The steady voice of monarchy now cracked with grief. When William entered his father's study, they said nothing. Charles rose and embraced his son. No protocol, no speeches. William's shoulders shook. The crown broke in his father's arms. "Take time," Charles whispered. "The nation will wait." William shook his head. "She wouldn't want delay. She'd want me to keep going for the children." The king nodded, understanding clear in his eyes. "Then let the nation grieve with you," he said softly. "You do not need to carry this alone." By evening, the first vigil began. The sun had barely set, casting long, amber shadows across the city's streets. When candles flickered to life outside Buckingham Palace, thousands gathered in silence, holding flowers, photographs, and letters, their faces reflecting the soft glow of flame. No royal directive had called them there. They simply came, drawn by love, by shock, by the instinct to mourn the woman who had felt more like family than royalty, whose presence had threaded quietly through their lives, comforting and grounding in ways few could articulate. Television crews arrived, but their voices were hushed. Their usual urgency dissolved into reverent observation. Reporters abandoned their scripted coverage, speaking only in whispers softened by sincerity. "The nation waits," one anchor said quietly, for confirmation of what many already feared, each word carefully weighed, carrying the unbearable weight of unspoken grief. Back inside the palace, William sat with his children. The nursery felt painfully unchanged. The same books, the same toys, the faint lingering scent of Catherine's perfume remained on the pillows, a ghost of presence that haunted and soothed simultaneously. She had kissed them goodnight. George sat closest to him, his small hand resting on his father's knee. Charlotte's eyes wide and uncertain, darting between her brothers, searching for reassurance. Louis leaned against William's arm, too young to grasp the permanence of loss, yet sensing the charged stillness in the air. William swallowed hard before speaking, his voice trembling despite the effort to remain calm. "Mummy loved you more than words can say," he whispered, forcing his voice to remain steady, though each syllable cracked with pain. "And she told me something just for us." George looked up, his lip trembling. "What did she say?" Papa William hesitated, the memory of her voice both healing and unbearable. "She said that when we see each other smile, we'll see her too, a fragile promise echoing with the depth of a lifetime. That every time they laughed, she would be near, even for a fleeting moment." None of them spoke immediately, letting the weight of her words settle. Then Charlotte climbed into his lap, whispering, Can she see us now? William's throat tightened, the answer catching in his chest. Yes, my darling, she's watching us right now. Lewis, barely understanding, pointed toward the window. Is she in the stars? William smiled through tears. Yes, maybe she's the brightest one. Their innocence cut deeper than any headline ever could, slicing through centuries of royal history and protocol. This was simply a father holding his children, their fragile hearts intertwined, a family shattered, yet still breathing in the safety of each other's presence. In the hallway outside, Carol and Michael Middleton stood quietly, arms wrapped around one another, clinging to the shared warmth of family amidst sorrow. They had been dignified through every chapter of Catherine's royal life, but now they were simply parents grieving their daughter. Palace staff, hardened by decades of duty, averted their eyes, many fighting tears of their own, their composure brittle against the tide of quiet heartbreak. That night, Windsor slept uneasily. The palace, so often alive with preparation for ceremony and state, now felt like a mausoleum, the walls heavy with silence and memory, every echo reverberating loss. The portraits of past monarchs watched in painted silence, as though even they could sense the shift in absence of light where it had once dwelled. Near midnight, William returned to the chapel. He lit a single candle at the altar where he had sat that morning. The flame flickered weakly at first, then steadied, reflecting in his tear-streaked eyes, the fragile reflection of grief mirrored back in the polished stone. He knelt, hands clasped loosely. His voice, a whisper, broke the silence. "Thank you," he said, not elaborating, for no words could encompass what filled his heart. There was no need. The words carried everything: gratitude, grief, love, faith, and the fragile acceptance that the woman who had defined his world had left him a mission far greater than himself, a mission to honor her life through every future step. In the distance, the wind swept through the gardens, rustling the magnolia trees. She loved. It was a sound almost imperceptible, yet William heard it as though the world itself sighed alongside him. By dawn, the press office released the carefully crafted statement. 37 words, chosen with meticulous care, were sent across the globe. The Princess of Wales passed peacefully, surrounded by her family. Her kindness, courage, and grace will be remembered by the world, and every word carried the quiet devastation of a nation in mourning. She so deeply touched, the news spread with quiet devastation. Bells tolled across cities and villages, flags lowered to half-mast, and as the sun rose once more over Windsor, the palace remained, still its heart forever changed, the nation mourning, a hush of sorrow lingering like morning mist. The news broke just after sunrise, cascading across television screens, phones, and radios. The announcement echoed like a distant bell. The Princess of Wales has passed peacefully, surrounded by her family. For a brief moment, Britain stood still. Commuters froze mid-step. Shopkeepers paused before opening their doors. The hum of a waking nation softened into collective disbelief. In London, the first to arrive at Kensington Palace were not reporters, but citizens, mothers with prams, veterans in medals, schoolchildren clutching hand-picked flowers, each drawn by devotion, grief, and admiration. They gathered at the black iron gates, the same gates that had once overflowed with tributes decades earlier for another princess lost too soon. Bouquets began to pile against the railings, lilies, roses, and wildflowers from local gardens, each carrying a handwritten note. "She was our hope," one card read. Another said simply, "Thank you, Catherine, for teaching us grace." By midday, the crowd had grown into thousands. Television cameras rolled, yet the reporters spoke softly, as if afraid to break the reverence. Even the British press seemed humbled by the gravity of the moment, moved by the sheer sincerity of public devotion. At Westminster Abbey, the great bells tolled their solemn rhythm, cutting through the crisp autumn air. Flags across the Commonwealth were lowered to half-mast. In Edinburgh, Sydney, Ottawa, and Wellington, public vigils formed spontaneously. Candles flickered in churchyards, and strangers held hands in silence. In London, St. James's Park, a choir of children sang quietly beneath the weeping willows. Their voices trembled with innocence, rising through the chill morning air in tribute to the woman who had knelt beside so many children in hospitals and schools, who had made kindness seem like duty. Within Windsor Castle, the royal household moved through rehearsed precision, yet this was no ceremony. Courtiers wore black armbands. Their composure was brittle. The royal kitchen halted its usual bustle. Even the guards at the gates carried themselves with a softer stillness, aware that the nation's gaze was not upon pomp, but upon grief itself. Prince William did not appear in public that day. He remained with his children, protecting what little privacy remained in this moment of raw loss. In their private quarters, a gentle rain streaked the window panes. George stood beside him, watching raindrops race down the glass. "It's like the sky is crying, Papa," he whispered. William placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Yes," he said quietly, "maybe heaven misses her too." That afternoon, King Charles addressed the nation from Buckingham Palace. The speech was brief, measured, heartfelt, and uncharacteristically personal. His voice trembled only once when he said her name. She brought warmth to every corner of our family and every heart. She touched across this nation. He said, "Her example of service and grace will remain a guiding light for us." All around Britain, people wept in small villages. Church bells joined the chorus of mourning. Historians drew parallels to Princess Diana's passing, though they spoke carefully. Catherine's story was her own, a modern queen in spirit, a woman who carried centuries of tradition with unstudied humanity. At Westminster, the Archbishop of Canterbury held a brief reflection. "She showed us that compassion need not bow to power, that kindness is a form of courage," he said, his voice echoing through the vast cathedral. In hospitals, she had visited nurses. At primary schools across England, teachers spoke to students about her charity work. Children drew pictures of her smiling face and left them on classroom windows. In a quiet corner of Berkshire, Carol and Michael Middleton sat together, their faces etched with heartbreak. For them, this was not a royal tragedy, but the loss of a daughter who had once baked cakes in their kitchen and laughed at the smallest things. "She was never trying to be perfect," Carol whispered to a friend. "She was just trying to be kind." That evening, the rain stopped. The clouds parted to reveal a stretch of pale blue sky over London. At exactly 8 o'clock, the palace organised a moment of national reflection. Across the United Kingdom, lights dimmed. Big Ben stood silent. Cities fell still. Millions held candles at their windows. In Windsor, William stood on the terrace with his children. The flicker of candlelight reflected in the palace windows below, a sea of gold stretching into the distance. Charlotte leaned against his arm and whispered, "Mummy would like all the lights." He smiled faintly, his eyes glistening. "Yes, my love," he said. She would. The following morning, newspapers across the world printed the same image, Catherine's portrait, framed in soft light beneath the headline, "The People's Princess Reborn." Commentators spoke of her humility, her compassion, her refusal to be distant from those she served. She had redefined what it meant to be royal, not through spectacle, but through presence in Parliament. The Prime Minister's voice broke as she addressed the chamber. Her Royal Highness taught us that true leadership lies in empathy. She will remain not just in history, but in our hearts. Even those who had never met her felt her absence like the loss of a family member. Strangers left flowers for someone they had only seen on screens, but somehow felt they knew. The nation's grief transcended protocol. Back at Windsor, preparations for the funeral began quietly. Plans that had been written years earlier under the code name Operation Lily were now being set in motion. The palace would ensure dignity, but William made one request. No excessive grandeur. He wanted her farewell to reflect who she had been, elegant, humble, radiant in simplicity. As the days passed, the royal family gathered strength and unity. The Queen Consort oversaw the ceremonial details. The King met daily with advisers, but all eyes turned toward William, who would soon have to face the nation. Behind closed doors, he practiced his speech for the memorial. He stood in an empty room, reading aloud to the air. "She was my compass," he said softly. "She showed me how to lead without hardness, how to serve without pride." His voice faltered as he reached the words she told me to keep smiling. He lowered the paper and looked out the window toward the courtyard below. The scent of rain lingered, mingled with the faint perfume of the flowers flooding the gates. Somewhere beyond, the crowd continued to grow, their candles reflecting in the puddles along the road. The sound of quiet sobs drifted upward through the still air, and in that moment, standing at the window of Windsor, Prince William understood what she had meant by her final whisper. Heaven has its own way of staying near. The legacy she left behind stretched weeks past, though time seemed to move differently now, quieter, heavier, as if the world itself had paused to adjust to her absence. The palace resumed its routines, but the rhythm was slower, softer. Courtiers spoke gently. Footsteps echoed longer in the halls. Even the gardens, so often alive with laughter and music, seemed to mourn her. Still, amid the stillness, something beautiful began to emerge. The world did not forget Catherine. It remembered her with a tenderness rarely granted to those of power. Her face graced murals. Her words appeared in classrooms. Her work, especially with children and mental health, continued to bloom. Through those she had inspired, her kindness had become a living thing, passed from hand to hand, quietly refusing to fade. Prince William felt that most of all. Each morning, he woke to the muffled sound of life continuing outside his window, staff greeting one another, horses in the courtyard, the first carriage departing for official duties. It was strange how the world could keep moving while one's heart remained still. But then he would hear laughter, light, unguarded, laughter from down the corridor, and he would know the children were awake. And in that laughter, he heard her. He began taking them for walks again, just as she had loved to do. Through Windsor's gardens, beneath the magnolias, and along the narrow paths by the water, George walked ahead, hands in his pockets, trying to appear grown. Charlotte gathered wildflowers for the table. Lou darted from one tree to the next, chasing his shadow. William followed quietly, his grief tempered by gratitude in public. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. His posture remained regal, but his eyes carried a new depth. There was a warmth there, a softness that had not been seen before. He no longer spoke from duty alone. He spoke from the heart. At appearances, he lingered longer with children, clasped hands more firmly, looked people in the eye. The world could see it. Love had changed him. When the time came for the memorial service, Windsor was blanketed in pale mist. Once more, St. George's Chapel stood solemn, golden in the morning light, its bells tolling with gentle reverence. Foreign dignitaries, world leaders, and thousands of citizens filled the grounds. Yet despite the grandeur, the atmosphere was intimate, more like a gathering of family than a state ceremony. Inside, the choir began to sing her favourite hymn, their voices rising toward the vaulted ceiling, each note carrying the ache of remembrance and the quiet faith of love enduring beyond sight. The children sat in the front row, holding hands. Their faces were pale, their composure far beyond their years. Beside them, William sat still, his expression steady, but his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. When his turn came to speak, he rose slowly and approached the lectern. The cathedral fell into perfect silence. Cameras from around the world focused on him, yet he seemed unaware of them. He spoke not as a prince, but as a husband, a father, and a man still learning how to live without the other half of his heart. "She was my compass," he began, his voice measured, calm. "She showed me that strength and gentleness are not opposites, but partners. She taught me how to serve, not by position, but by compassion." He paused, taking a slow breath. Catherine believed that kindness could rebuild the world one act at a time, and she was right. I see it now, in our children, in the people she touched, in the countless lives changed by her quiet devotion. He looked down briefly, his composure wavering. "She told me before she left us that when I see our children smile, I will see her, and I do." Every day, a faint tremor ran through his voice. "So I ask you," he continued, "not to mourn her absence, but to carry her example forward, live her kindness, share her gentleness, let her light guide you as it guides us." When he stepped back, the crowd rose in silent unity. The sound of gentle weeping filled the air, mingled with the rustle of programs and the soft creak of pews. Outside, The bells rang once more, their echo carrying across the fields and into the hearts of millions watching around the world. In the days that followed, the royal family returned to quiet life, yet everything felt transformed. William spent his evenings reading bedtime stories in the same voice that had once made Catherine laugh. He began to visit her favourite charities often, without cameras, continuing her work, not from obligation, but from love. Each visit was a conversation with her spirit, each act of service a way of keeping her close. He commissioned a small statue in the palace garden, not of grandeur or triumph, but of grace. It showed Catherine seated on a stone bench, smiling gently, her hands open as if welcoming the world around her. 3 children stood, each holding a flower beneath the statue, and an inscription read, "Where kindness reigns, love never dies." The world came to see it. Visitors left notes at its base, not of mourning, but of gratitude. Letters from mothers, teachers, nurses, and strangers who had never met her yet felt they had known her all along. At night, when the crowds dispersed and the palace lights dimmed, William often walked alone through the gardens. The magnolias glowed faintly in the moonlight, their petals trembling in the wind. He would stop before the statue, his hands clasped loosely, and whisper the same words he had spoken in that hospital room. Heaven has its own way of staying near. In that moment, he felt her presence. Not as a ghost or memory, but as peace. History would remember Catherine as the Princess of Wales, the wife of a future king. But to William, she remained something far greater. His home, his anchor, his reason. Through her, the monarchy itself rediscovered its heart. Because in the end, her greatest legacy was not charity or ceremony. It was love, quiet, steadfast, royal. In its humility, love that reminded the world that even behind crowns and corridors of power beats a human heart capable of breaking, capable of healing, and capable of hope. Catherine's story reminds us that grace is not found in grandeur, but in compassion. If her journey moved you, honour her legacy by showing kindness to someone today. Subscribe for more royal stories where behind every crown lies a heartbeat, and behind every headline, a human soul.